Good morning. Welcome to First Universalist, to the First Religious Society, Unitarian Universalist Church here in Newburyport. I'm Alan Seal, and I have the privilege of serving as your worship associate today for our annual Martin Luther King service. If you're visiting with us today, or perhaps even here for the first time, we're especially glad that you're here. Welcome to you. And also welcome to those who are with us online. If you wish to access the order of service, you'll find it either in your reminder email or just under the live screen window. This morning we welcome local historian Ghlee Woodworth to the pulpit to share her stories of Newburyport Black history from the late 18th to the 20th centuries. These stories are taken from her most recent book, Newburyport Clipper Heritage Trail, Volume 2. And though she has given numerous talks on the history of this area, this is the first time that she's given this particular talk. So we are very honored to be the first. Thank you so much for being with us today. Ghlee is a Newburyport native. She is a 12th generation descendant of Robert Adams, who's one of the first settlers of Newbury. And after growing up here, she spent 15 years in the Peace Corps, volunteering and mentoring host country national staff in 13 different countries before returning to Newburyport in 2005. There's a full biography of her in the order of service, so you can find out more about her there. And her books will be for sale in the vestibule after the service today. We will also hear today from FRS member Sid Rashke, who has been instrumental in helping to introduce the Black Heritage Trail here in Newburyport. So thank you, Sid, for being with us and for your work in our city. We hope that you can stay with us immediately following the service for a question and answer session with Ghlee, and that session will continue online as well. And so, logistics done. Maybe it's been a week full of logistics for you as it has for me. Take a deep breath and settle in here. And allow yourself to be held in this space and in the love of this church. Here at FRS, we are committed to love and peace and to justice. And our mission and vision and invitation to all of you is to come as you are. Come as you are. And journey together in love, act with courage, transform our world. It's a blessing to be together. We're glad that you're here with us.
Good morning again. I am delighted to come together this morning in honor of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy of working toward economic and racial equity and peace in this country and world. Dr. King was not a Unitarian Universalist. However, he did have deep and abiding faiths and ties with our denomination, including the fact that our publishing company published some of his letters and works that were not published elsewhere. He also spoke at our General Assembly in 1966, and he preached the eulogy for Reverend James Reeb, a Unitarian minister who lost his life in Selma, Alabama in 1965 after being attacked by a group of white supremacists. Reeb had traveled to Selma to answer Martin Luther King's call for clergy to support the nonviolent protest movements for voting rights that were there. So it is with the deepest of respect and honor and love that I hope from the bottom of my heart that Dr. King would be happy to see what we are doing here today together, hearing for the first time the stories of Black residents of Newburyport past. These stories that could have been forgotten and thankfully will not be due to the work of Ghlee Woodworth and many others who are deeply committed to the preservation of this history, including all of you who are here today. This is also the start of a month-long process here at FRS of deeper learning about racial equity, including with a visit from a scholar who will be preaching on January 29th on the history of Thomas Wentworth Higginson, especially his brief ministry here at FRS from 1847 to 1849. This is all part of our congregational commitment to racial justice and to creating a beloved community richer for our diversity and committed to dismantling oppression. As we remember Martin Luther King's words, he spoke, I open our worship with this sentiment. He said, when the church is true to its nature, it stands as moral guardian of the community and of society. When the church is true to its nature, it stands as a moral guardian of the community and of society. You are faithfully and joyfully called to worship. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join together in our opening hymn, number 360, Here We Have Gathered. Please be seated.
Please join us in our chalice lighting with the words in your orders of service. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Each week, we also light 2 candles of peace, representing 2 places on earth we lift up and remember as a sacred encounter with our world. There are untold numbers of places on earth that need peace. These 2 we especially hold close in our hearts through this service and through the days and the week ahead. After each candle is lit, I invite you to respond saying the word peace in 3 languages: peace, sol, shalom. Our first candle this morning is lit for cities, neighborhoods, and towns across our country who will be honoring the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. tomorrow. May we strive in our values and actions of hands and heart to create a world free of injustice and oppression, a world where all people are truly free and safe. To this we respond, peace, sol, shalom. And our second candle this morning is lit for Southern California, where they have been devastated and hit with torrential rains and floods and now snows that are responsible at this point, we know, for at least 17 deaths. We pray for all those who are being affected by this, for the lives that are lost, and for the communities being devastated by this experience. To this we respond, peace, sol, shalom. Please rise now again in body or in spirit, and let's join together in our century music in the Teal hymnal 1013, Open My Heart.
Good morning, everyone. This morning, I'd like for us to sing this in a slightly different way. I will sing it to you once, and then I invite you to join me together. And as we sing it a few more times, the choir will join us, responding in a round. Open my heart to all that I seek. Let me be part of the love you give. Open my heart to all that I seek. Let me be part of the love you give. Open my heart to all that I seek. Let me be part of the love you give. Open my heart to all that I seek. Let me be part of the love you give.
Please remain standing. Let's join our voices in our affirmation of faith, followed by the doxology. The words for the affirmation of faith and doxology are in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God.
Every land by
Please be seated. I'd also like to invite forward at this time all of our children and youth for our Time for All Ages.
While you're all getting settled and coming up and still coming up, has anyone walked on a rail trail? Quite a few of you. Maybe one of you saw one of the information signs, like the one on the Clipper City Trail in Newburyport that shows the train falling off the bridge. Has anyone seen that one? Yeah. It's a little train, but still, it shouldn't be falling off the bridge. Well, today I'm talking about a new sign, and this sign is going to be on another bridge on that very same trail. It's the bridge that goes over Low Street, and some of you may know where the skating rink is. Yeah, it's going to be near there. Well, in a couple weeks, there will be a ceremony to dedicate the first historic sign for the Black History Initiative, a team I'm part of, with a Newburyport project manager named Jordy Vining and a university professor, Dr. Cabria Baumgartner, who teaches history. This sign describes a village that used to exist near the bridge a very, very long time ago, way before your parents and your grandparents and even their parents. The little neighborhood was called Ghlee Village. And you know what? It's almost completely forgotten, even though it was special. You might wonder, why was it special? Well, it's because most of those who lived there were Black Americans, African Americans, and other people of color. Our speaker in Big Church today is Ghlee Woodworth, a historian who has kept this memory alive. You'll be in Young Church when she is speaking, but Ghlee is the first person who wanted a sign on the trail so people would not forget. I think Ghlee deserves a cheer, don't you? Thank you, Ghlee. Okay, back to our story. One sad thing about the neighborhood was back then, people of color were not allowed to vote in any elections. And women were not allowed to vote either. Happy to say that has all changed, and now every citizen can vote. Well, this neighborhood was full of families and men and women who grew vegetables. And they cut and styled people's hair, and they fixed shoes and sewed clothes, and they wanted to vote, so they did. Every summer, they would gather for a few days, which was wonderful because otherwise they had to work all the time, much more than we do now. And they would vote for their own leaders, someone they liked and respected. And because they were all together, they had a party. After they voted in their elections, they had a party and they called it Election Day. I like that, Election Day. Well, that summer party sounds kind of like Yankee Homecoming. Has anyone ever been to Yankee Homecoming? Or maybe your town has a special summer festival that you've been to. Well, in many towns back then, people of color would have Election Day festivities with yummy food and music and singing, dancing, and art. It kind of sounds like Yankee Homecoming, doesn't it? And that lively little neighborhood called Ghlee Village is all gone now. So our Black History team agreed with Ghlee that it would be a good idea to make a sign so people would never forget. If you want to go to the sign's dedication, it's going to be the first Wednesday in February at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you do come, wave to me or say hi. Thank you for listening.
Go now in peace. And now we invite you to sing Go Now in Peace and sing the children to Young Church.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
The generosity of our FRS community is an essential ministry that supports the work of our church, both in Newburyport and beyond. Half of each Sunday's collection that is not designated as a pledge goes to support a local partner working to transform our region. The January shared collection will help the Community Service Newburyport Campership program. Community Service of Newburyport provides support through clothing, emergency relief and referral services, and a food pantry for people in need in Newburyport, West Newbury, and Newbury. In addition, they run the holiday gift bag program for children and seniors, and in the summer, they provide 2 weeks of summer camp for children. If you would like to give online, please use the link in your order of service or in the video description. You can always give through a text message or by sending a message to the church as well. And the ushers will be in the aisles. And so, our offering is now gratefully received.
This is a time in our service each week when we pause to remember the joys and the sorrows of our beloved faith community. Holly Cashman, our pastoral care associate this morning, will light candles as I read what has been shared with me, both in advance and from the journal this morning. We wanted to share and light a candle in memory of Howard Fairweather, as we learned last week that he passed rather unexpectedly. His memorial service will be held here at FRS Saturday, February 4th at 2 p.m. It will be both in person and online, and I will have the honor of officiating. Joanne Carroll asks that we remember with her the first anniversary of the death of her husband, Charles Carroll. And she writes, and I share her words, "The patriarch of our little family is gone. Charles was the proud father of Christine, Charles, or Chuck, sadly also now deceased, and Robert Carroll. He was also the proud grandfather of John, known as Jack Carroll. And he was one of the few people I've ever known who lived his whole life in the same town, having been born and died at Anna Jake's Hospital in Newburyport. He loved his family, he loved his community, and we miss him." Casey Swallow asks that we light a candle of love and concern for Maxine Steves, who is in our thoughts and prayers as she is now at Country Manor Rehab and Nursing here in Newburyport, recovering her health and also recovering now from COVID. So we remember Maxine. Deb Moss shares and asks for your love and prayers that she and her husband have just learned the news that he's been diagnosed with lung cancer and will be starting chemotherapy and radiation. I know she appreciates all of your care and love. Vern Ellis and Susan Stone shared the sad news that Dan Bancroft, who is the husband of a Unitarian Universalist minister, Reverend Ann Bancroft, suddenly died while he was having a winter swim. He was a vibrant and loving soul. Life is so tender. We also light this morning a candle of joy as we celebrate Barbara Owen, your 90th birthday that is coming up, and the celebration that will be here on Saturday, honoring all of your work and your legacy, Barbara, in the choral music tradition and, of course, in the organ world. We hope everyone can join us. And we light a final candle, as we do each week, for all of the sorrows and all of the joys that are on our hearts, that although unnamed, are held in just as much love and care. This morning, I'd like to invite you into a spirit of prayer by sharing in great humility a prayer and specific words exactly as written by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he said this in his prayer: "O God, we thank you for the lives of great saints and prophets in the past, who have revealed to us that we can stand up amid the problems and difficulties and trials of life and not give in. We thank you for our foreparents who've given us something in the midst of the darkness of exploitation and oppression to keep going. Grant that we will go on with the proper faith and the proper determination of will, so that we will be able to make a creative contribution to this world. In the name and the Spirit of Jesus, we pray, and in his honor, we sit for a moment. May it be so.
Hello again. I want to let you know, unfortunately, for a variety of complicated reasons, we're unable to share the anthem in the order of service this morning. However, the intrepid and dedicated choir has prepared another selection for you. If you want to read along, it is number 1020 in your teal hymnal. It's called Woyaya, arranged by Eze Barnwell. And this song is all about the journey that we are on together, a journey we will never see the end of. We may not know the final destination, but the journey we are on together is very important and meaningful for us.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ghlee Woodworth. Thank you for being here. All right. I always say that what I learn, I always like to share. So here are some things I've learned over the years. First, thank you to Reverend Rebecca for inviting me. And is everybody all set? Everybody comfortable? All right. Stories of Newburyport's Black community. My interest has been at least a dozen years about the Black community, but there's been many people researching and collecting stories about our early Black community. 1990s, Dr. Carrie Poria put a brochure and map together on the Black Yankees A Walking Tour. Then in 2002, Jane Yulsika and Rosemarie Green put together a Black Heritage Trail 35-page document and map. And Bethany, the director of the Museum of Old Newbury, and I said last summer, I said, hey, how about we update the Heritage Trail? And she said, sure. So we're waiting on a grant, and I think by now the brochure and the map is going to be this big, because we have learned so much in the past dozen years. Let's do an overview of our community. 1635, Newbury was settled, and it stretched from Parker River all the way through West Newbury, 13 miles long. 1725, the third parish meeting house was established in Market Square, and this is the predecessor of this church here. It was built and completed in 1801. The beginning of the Port of Newbury was when the third parish meeting house was established in Market Square. It was the beginning of the town of Newburyport being established in 1763. And then Newburyport became a city in 1851. Okay? Quiz when I see you on the sidewalk. Hey, some facts. Were there slaves in Newbury? Yes. Examples coming. Did Newburyport, Port of Newbury, build slave ships for the transatlantic trade? Yes. Susan Harvey's research uncovered at least 47 vessels, and this research is ongoing. Census records. How many blacks were in the community? That's a common question I always get. 1780s, the population of Newbury was about 4,800. There were 59 black men and women listed in the census. In the 1840s, the railroad arrives. Over 3,000 immigrants come to town. The population balloons up to 10,000, and there were about 100 blacks in the community, according to the census. That's at the peak height. 1900, there were 14,000 residents and about 50 in the black community. All right. Slaves, a tough subject. Author historian Joshua Coffin, 1845. Examples: 1716, Rice Edwards of Newbury, shipwright, sells to Edmund Greenleaf. My whole personal estate, with all my goods and chattels, as also 1 Negro man, 1 cow, 3 pigs, with timber, plank, and boards. 1738, Ezekiel Chase of Newbury sold to John Merrill for 40 pounds his Negro boy Titus, about 1.5 years old. Yes, babies were sold and purchased. 1735, Reverend Matthias Plant, in his diary, June 22nd, records, I wrote to Mr. Salmon of Barbados to send me a Negro. In 1753, 18 years later, Reverend Matthias passes away, and he willed his black servant Lucy 17 acres of land he owned in Amesbury. And Reverend's widow inherited Lucy. She gave Lucy her freedom. So the owner's could grant freedom, and it was their choice to do so. In addition to census records and vital records, churches recorded black artists and black births and deaths and marriages. And I went to the library archives a few weeks ago, and the third parish meeting house records, 1725, Reverend John Lowell handwritten records that I read. And here is examples of Reverend Lowell's baptisms. Baptized December 17, 1727, Cujo, Negro, adult servant to Mr. B. Coker. Baptized January 7th, 1728, Joe, a Negro, adult servant to Colonel Richard Kent. Baptized December 5th, 1731, Peter, Deacon Noyes, mulatto servant boy. Now, Reverend Thomas Carey, who followed Reverend Lowell, he recorded deaths. and now there are changes I can see in the handwritten records. Died October 1791, 68 years, Nancy Freeman. There was no designation next to her name, and I recognized her name and cross-checked with vital records. Marriages and intentions were recorded. No designation. Reverend Thomas Carey and Reverend John Andrews. I recognize the names again. August 3rd, 1797, Fortune and Flora filed marriage intentions. Reverend John Andrews married December 23rd, 1783, apropos Tracy and Dinah Hill. Again, no designations next to the name. So progress. In honor of these former members of our community, let us say their names out loud after me. Lucy. Titus. Joe. Cujo. Peter. Nancy. Fortune and Flora. Apropos and Dinah. And we honor all the slaves, young and old. And we honor all the slaves, young and old. All right, let's talk about Ghlee Village. Arthur Sarah Emery lived from 1787 to 1879. Writes, back of the pond stood a collection of low, unpainted huts. This village was styled Ghlee. Here were the homes of the colored population, of which there was quite a number. They were mostly descendants of servants formerly held as slaves in our first households. So Ghlee, if you're at Bartlett Mall by the courthouse, you look over Frog Pond, then there is Greenleaf Street, on the right is Auburn Street, on the left is Pond Street that connects to Low Street. Keep in mind, the Route 1 bypass did not arrive until the 1930s. Okay, so that was just all woods and fields. Ghlee refers to West Africa, where the original slaves came from. So it's Guinea or Guinea. And the Ghlee population eventually disappears, and that's a common question. Where did they all go? Well, the elders pass on. Sons and daughters get married, they move off, they find jobs. So by the mid to late 1800s, black families settled in homes throughout Newburyport. Author Sarah Emery remembers some of the residents of Ghlee. She says, there was old Cambridge, who could remember being kidnapped when a child and brought to this country in a slave vessel. Lucy Lancaster, known as Black Luce, a famous nurse. Clement Paul, a genteel waiter. Joe Fatal worked for Colonel Greenleaf. And there was Lily White, was the well-known chimney sweep. And Jimmy Paul, Sip Burnham, and others were useful members of society and respected citizens. Author George Parsons in 1893 writes about his memories of down in Ghlee in the 1820s and 30s. And he says, there was Titus Pickering, George Paul, a fine skater and sportsman. There was Fred Fatal, who worked at the Boston Custom House. There was Baba Charlie Jackson and the acrobat John Phillips. There was the Paul family. The father, Clement Paul, was a slave in the Caribbean, on the Caribbean French island of Martinique. And he arrived in town on a ship serving as a cook, and he deserted, and he stayed, and he squatted on the corner of Greenleaf and Pond Street, and he built his house. He married Charlotte, had children George and Catherine. George was a veteran of the Civil War, and Catherine was a laundress, a domestic, and she worked for Judge Thomas Simpson and attorney Robert Burke up on the ridge along High Street. They were one-time mayors. Arthur Oliver Merrill, he lived from 1836 to 1912. He was a Newburyport high school teacher for over 25 years, and he wrote a series of Newburyport articles for the Newburyport Herald. On January 1878, he tells the story about the young ladies of Guinea. In the year of grace, 1820, the usual undisturbed serenity of the educational horizon was darkened by a shadow that for a time gave much uneasiness to the learned divine and other dignified men that were guardians of the schools. Some young ladies of Guinea, not satisfied with their educational privileges, dared to present themselves at one of the female grammar schools. This caused much annoyance, both the parents and school committee, and after considerable talk, the authorities voted that girls of color be excluded from the female grammar schools. The Female Charitable Society sponsored the half-year school for the next 10 years, and in 1825, the town voted to adopt the African school and furnish a teacher. Then the town report in 1835 is talking about the colored children, and now they are few in number, not exceeding 8 or 10, but they are part of our population, for whose necessities we are equally obliged by law to provide as for any other class. In honor of these former members of Guinea Village, let us recite their names out loud. Titus Pickering, Old Cambridge, Lucy Lancaster, Joe and Fred Fatal, Jimmy Paul, Sip Burnham, Lily White, Charlie and John, all the Guinea Village families. And we honor the brave little girls demanding equal education. Okay. How's everybody doing? All right? Okay. All right, now we're going to talk the First Religious Society, Unitarian Universalist Church neighborhood. And these are some of my favorite people. Celia Owens, Raymond Dixon. She lived from 1827 to 1887. And Mrs. Hale, who lived on Mount Rule, what's there now? Mount Rule, Newburyport High School. The Hale family lived there. She went and visited down in Richmond, Virginia in 1849. She meets Celia and she purchases her. She brings her back to Newburyport. Celia works for her, lives with her, works with her. And within months, she is employed with other families. She essentially purchased Celia's freedom. Now, a few months later, after Celia's arrival, Celia receives a letter from her mother, Susan, who is still a slave in Richmond. And it's postmarked, addressed to Celia Owens, care of Mrs. S.W. Hale, Newburyport, Mass. Not sure who wrote the letter. Susan's mom writes, says, "My dearest daughter, I was very glad to find by your letter to your friends that you were enjoying good health and that you were satisfied with your new home, and I hope these few lines will find you still in full enjoyment of both these blessings. My master does not do anything for me. He say if I could get anyone to buy me at $75, he would take that. He ought to know that no one is going to give that sum. Everyone that hears of this unreasonable demand laughs at it, for he knows well enough that I am not worth anything like that sum. She goes on and asks Celia if she could send any money, if she could spare. Sadly, Mother Susan passes away the following year. So this is what's on Celia's mind. But Celia goes on. She marries Andrew Raymond in 1851. They live in Guinea Village on Auburn Street. Andrew passes away. She marries Jacob Dixon in 1861, and they purchase a house on Titcomb Street, across from where the parking garage is. It's no longer there. And she takes in boarders. She has a daughter, Eliza. She's a musician, a music teacher, and she marries Moses Towns, a porter at Wolf Tavern for 50 years. Celia and Eliza and Moses' family are buried in Highland Cemetery. George C. Gray, he's a native of New York, born in 1849, passed away in 1927, came to Newburyport after he served in the Civil War in the Navy, and he was a chef, and he worked at Mrs. Francis Restaurant, the best dinner in town, right on the other side of City Hall. And the Francis men were very involved with the Colored Oddfellows, a Mason group. Later, George owned a coffee house and restaurant in Market Square, and wife Margaret was a Quaker from Pennsylvania, and they are buried in Highland Cemetery. The Smith family lived right here on Unicorn Street. Amy was a dressmaker and seamstress, and husband James was a firefighter at Wolf Tavern, right up here on State Street. And boarder Walter Towns was a cook at the Wolf Tavern. John C.H. Young, one of my favorite people. He opened up a barber shop on Water Street and Merrimack, and also he worked here as a barber on Unicorn Street. On his stone, an Old Hill burying ground, reads, "A colored man of many virtues, poor as the poorest. He fed the hungry, clothed the naked, and was a father to the fatherless. Kind and obliging to all, he has finished his course and has gone to rest." This tablet is erected by his friends. Schofield Baptist, he was the first bootblack, shoe shine business right across the street where the driveway is for the post office here on Pleasant Street. He was born in Virginia. He arrived in Newburyport with his brothers John and Edward, stepfather Samuel, and his mother Amanda, who was born a slave. And Schofield opened the business here, and then he moved down to Inn Street. He was the first business to serve women. Thank you, Mr. Baptiste. He was one of the founders of the Beulah Baptist Church on Temple Street, and he was also a member of the Colored Oddfellows. Across the street is Griffin Hall. There were many Colored Oddfellow events there, musical concerts, and cakewalks. And it was a dance contest, and the winner would win a cake. Nelson Ricks lived on Charter Street, right off of State by the 5 cents. You take a left on Charter, that first house on the right was the Ricks family house. He worked as a laborer, railroad worker, and stableman, and his family's buried in Highland Cemetery. Peter Romilly, 1833 to 1898. He arrived on ship from Barbados. He was a cook, and he opened a restaurant down on Elbow Alley and on Liberty Street. And his daughter Isabel, who lived from 1861 to 1909, at 11 years old, she lost her sight, and she attended Perkins School for the Blind Institute. And she came back home. She was self-supporting. She was an accomplished musician and music teacher, and they're buried up in Highland Cemetery. My last story one of my favorite guys, Edward Moses. He was born in 1829. He passed away at the age of 84 years old in 1913. Edward was born a slave in Savannah, Georgia, with his parents. As a young man, he accompanied the plantation's owner's wife to New York. He met the hotel cook and was encouraged to escape, and he did. And he made his way to Boston, to the Young's Hotel. He ended up joining the Civil War effort. He survives, he comes back, and our friend John Young, the barber, said, "Come to Newburyport." He lived here for about 50 years, and he worked for the families, Ghlee families, and the Winder families. And Mr. Moses is buried in Highland Cemetery. In honor of these former members of our Unitarian Church neighborhood, let us recite their names. Celia, Andrew and Jacob, Eliza and Moses, Peter and Isabel, George and Margaret, the Francis family, John Young, Amy, James, and Walter, Schofield, Ida, Nelson and Elsie, and Edward Moses. So these are some of the stories of our Black community. We will continue to research and uncover more stories and shine a light on Newburyport's Black history. Everyone after me. We honor the history of our Black community. We are telling your stories. You are remembered. Thank you.
Wow, amazing. Actually, I invite us all to take a breath. That was, and is, a lot. I do hope that you'll stay, if you can, for some conversation, Q&A with Ghlee immediately after the postlude. Purchase her books and support her work. It's out in the vestibule. She'll also be offering a tour of many of the graves we've just heard about in March 25th, I believe. Although she said, you know, Reverend Rebecca, there might be snow on the ground in March. I said, we'll be fine. But, you know, what history to remember. Thank you for finding that history and working as you do to make sure that we remember it. If you would rise, please, in body or spirit, we'll join together in our closing hymn. It's in the gray hymnal, 168, One More Step.
One more step, deliverance
Please remain standing, and let's join together in our unison benediction as Alan extinguishes the chalice. Again, the words are in your order of service. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. My friends, as we depart from this sacred time, may we remember the names and the stories we have heard. May we remember them by our lives, by our deeds, by the feelings in our hearts and the actions we take with the gifts we have to share with this world. May we let every story matter, and may we listen and hear the story of all of those, both who have died and those who live, and for those who may come. Go in peace, my friends. Return again in great joy. Amen, and blessed be. Okay, again, we're going to start the Q&A. We have folks online, and so I would just invite people to come forward. I'll get the singing bowl. Let me get the singing bowl. Sing.
Some existed in general. You might need to say something. You can find it online.
Excuse me, everybody. If you would like to participate in the question and answer session, I invite you to come forward, sit somewhere here in the front part of the church. If you are exiting, please make sure to do so fairly quickly so that we can make sure that everyone who has a chance to ask a question can do so. Thank you.
I took the cemetery school a long time ago, and they were fantastic. I'm excited to see it. It's very good. Yeah. But thank you so much.
Yeah,
I mean,
we'll
thank
get
you
it to you.
for the lifetime doing this research.
Okay.
And it actually really? Oh, that's amazing.
Okay, so what we're going to do, for those who are here for the Q&A, we have, hi Marianne, we have a microphone that Justin, I don't know where he just went on me, but no, actually, Stephen Wolf, thank you Stephen, is going to be carrying the microphone to anyone who has a question. And we do ask that you use it because folks online won't be able to hear otherwise. And then Justin will be reading any questions that come for those who are participating online. So if someone has a question, why don't you raise your hand and we'll get started. Yes, Marianne, Stephen, behind you.
Ghlee, hi.
Hi.
I'm interested in knowing more about what you're planning to publish around the specific Black history discussion for Newburyport. I think you said something about you're waiting for a grant.
Yes. Yeah, Bethany and there's Sharon, the archivist, too. We'd like to update this walking tour brochure map. And so we're just waiting on that grant. It's a cultural council grant. And it's, like I said, there's just so many stories. I'm really thinking it's got to be this big. So it will be a walking tour. It will be online and printed. Right. So we don't know. The timeline, don't know. Could it be by fall? Sure, that would be great if it was by fall, but we don't know. Yeah.
I have a question of whether there are any of these people you mentioned left journals or any written documentation of their own story.
No, we have Celia's mother's, a couple letters. Sharon, I know you're thinking. I am, let's see, sir. I'm going through the names. No, because I would have quoted them. So they could be, but we don't know of any, that the few people that we know about in detail. Sharon, can you think of, nothing. Yeah. So as of right now, we don't have any words from those folks. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Ghlee. I'm Eliane, and
Oh, yes. How are you doing?
I'm good. And
Yes.
I work at the Cushing House.
Oh, okay, you're back at the Cushing.
Yeah,
Well, no, okay, yes.
Well, you know.
Yes.
The historical society.
Yes.
But I will never forget being up on the third floor where you could see, fourth floor, where you could see all these hooks, and you know that people lived up there in this unheated space. And we who worked there also knew that Caleb Cushing had a man who accompanied him all over the world. So before I get to the original question, I also want to add, thank you so much for all that work you've done.
You're welcome.
I'm just so pleased to hear you this morning, and I'm so impressed. So now
Thank
my
you.
question is, are you going to get to the Cushing House residents at some point, the people in the attic?
Oh, Bethany, I'm sure, eventually, Bethany's not here, but those stories will come out. There's just so much. Right, so, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for being here, Ghlee. So, quick question. You mentioned the Highland Cemetery.
Yes, sir.
A couple of times. I'm not familiar with where that is.
Sure. So Old Hill Burying Ground is directly behind the Mall, 1729. In 1800, the city chose to move across the street. It's Pond and Hill Street.
Okay.
Yeah, that goes up, and it was New Hill Burying Ground, and some, for over, a period over the years, and they changed the name to Highland Cemetery.
So within Highland Cemetery, is there a, quote, black section, or did they segregate the cemetery in any way?
Right, so Old Hill, on the Auburn Street side, there's a small section of black folks. Across the street, when I first did looking for grave sites 10, 12 years ago, I found 8 or 9 grave sites of black families, and they were spread throughout over 200 yards. There is not one spot. And so that was, I was just so happy to find that the folks are spread throughout about 200 yards. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ghlee. Your talk gave a great sense of, you pointed how local some of these places were to this. It sounded like through the 1800s, people moved more into the black community. You were a Guinea village, it sounded like kind of withered away.
Yes.
And people were more scattered
Yes.
around the neighborhoods. Do you have any sense of, as we moved to the late 1800s, were they, how well, it sounded like they occupied primarily relatively menial jobs and working jobs. Were they, how accepted were they in the community?
Right.
For their general treatment?
You know, there's a lot of newspaper articles about the black families. Business owners, Schofield Baptist owned his own business. He's a boot black and hat cleaner and cleaning here and then on N Street. John Young, he owned his own barber shop. Peter Romley owned his own restaurant. So they were owners of their business. And they lived from Warren Street. Schofield Baptist was up on Warren Street for about 30 years. John Young, I understand, was living on Johnson Street. And so they were spread throughout. But they were owners. I didn't have time, and I realize I'm going to be doing this presentation later this year, at least a couple more times, and I'll have at least 45 minutes or 50 minutes, and so I'll be able to add lots. But their comments, the reporters, in their obituaries, and they would make very, very nice comments and memorials to these folks. So, in general, they seem to be very accepted into the community, and often when you researching obituaries are great, and a lot of these obituaries will include flowers. Who gave flowers to the person who passed away? And there was a whole list of folks, and some of these black folks. And Margaret Cushing is just one name I can remember that she gave flowers to a couple of these folks. It might have been Schofield and Nelson, but other towns. But anyways, so it seems generally they were accepted. But it's hard to figure that out, the real feeling.
Good morning, Ghlee. Stan Barrett. Thank you. And just a brief comment and then a question. I was wondering, as you were having us name back the names to you, why it seemed so familiar, and it reminds me, I realized, about call and response, which is a common practice that American music inherits from the black tradition.
Okay.
The call and response. Question: we know that many enslaved peoples were of Muslim background. I wonder if you've uncovered any traces of Muslim practice among enslaved or former enslaved people in Newburyport and Newbury and West Newbury.
I have not. Sharon, have you heard of any? Wait a minute, if you can get a mic.
Can't really say, but there are a lot
Okay, so no, basically, no. We haven't uncovered any of the specific religions. They did attend. Now, there's a Beulah Baptist Church, I said Schofield helped to found on Temple Street. There was the word Baptist used often in the obituaries, certainly on Temple Street, but I think they're also connected with the Baptist Church. There was one on Court Street. There were many blacks, George Gray, Peter Romley lived on Market Street. They attended St. Paul's Church. Yes.
We have a question from online. Leslie McDonald asks, wondering about the presence of Black Americans in Amesbury, and if you know about that, and do we know maybe enough, or is there any interest in recreating some of the history walk or talks or research in Amesbury that we've been doing in Newburyport?
There's so much to learn in Newburyport. I think we all stick to Newburyport, so I'm sorry. But I know that Amesbury was certainly had a small black community, and I don't know who those folks are over in Amesbury, if there is any in the past or present searching. So those are the Amesbury folks you got to check in with.
Thank you so much, Ghlee, for keeping these stories and these people alive in our history.
You're welcome.
I had a question. I was curious about the baby, 1.5-year-old baby.
Titus.
Yes. Bought and purchased, and I was wondering why that might be, why that might have been done. Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I just haven't researched in detail about that. You wonder where the parents are. Did that owner still have the, did the owners have the parents? But that was common, I've read, but I don't know specifically this baby's story. I don't know. Anybody? Yeah, I don't know that specific baby story.
Thank you, Ghlee. I read, or I just understand that the parking lot beside our Newburyport Library used to be a tavern, and that there was a black man that was either a bartender and a bouncer. Did you mention his name?
Yes, the Towns family.
The Towns?
Yes. There was Moses, who was a porter for about 50 years. There was Walter Towns. Are they brothers? Possibly brothers. Walter was, what did I say? What was he? A cook? I think he was a cook. So there were, I think there were, and there was Lemuel Towns, and he also worked. So at least 3 towns, and my late father remembered he knew at least 1 or 2 of the towns. Yeah. So, yep. There's someone way over. You have a question still? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yep.
my name's Baron Brissett. I'm a resident here in
Brissett,
Newburyport.
yes, sir.
I've lived here for over 50 years.
Congratulations.
Okay. My wife's grandmother used to own a house right on Market Street, which we own now.
Yes.
So I never knew there was a lot of black history here in Newburyport. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York.
Okay.
So, you had different, New York City is a very ethnic, racially diverse community. So when we moved here, I always liked New England anyway as a kid growing up. And when I came here, I said to myself, I said to my wife, I said, well, this seems like a very predominant lily white community. Little did I know that, I'm glad that you were here to share this story and this history. I really appreciate it. I have no specific questions or anything. However, I do look forward to hearing more of the history here in Newburyport regarding the American community.
Wonderful. And what was it your wife's grandmother's house?
Grandmother,
What was
Fanny Jackson.
Jackson? Yes,
Jackson.
there was a Walter Jackson in
Walter
Guinea
Jackson.
Village.
Yeah, he was a standout football player in the
Yeah, and
50s.
yeah, the early. Okay, but there was a Jackson name in Guinea Village in the 1800s. Yeah. Okay.
History. So
Yes, sir.
I'm very thankful and grateful that you came here to share all of this.
You're welcome. And thank you. Yes, ma'am. Over here.
So I have one back here first, and then the...
You want to shout out? Wait a minute. Okay.
Thank you, Lee, for sharing all the information. I was curious, when we have all the history of families living here, at what point did they leave this area, and where did they go to settle? Do we have records of that?
Yeah, you'd have to track down each family, right? You have the early 1800s, the mid 1800s, it started to dwindle the population, so they were leaving. And again, simple, jobs, marriages, the elders passed away. But that would take looking at each individual and tracking them. And that's just more research, right? More research, lots of research. Time consuming, yes, you're right, sir.
Hi, I have two questions.
Yes, sir.
The first one is simple. You mentioned that Reverend Lowell did some baptisms
Yes.
in the early 1700s. Would baptism mean that they were part of the church?
I don't know what that definition, is it definitely part of the church? Yes. Okay, so yes, Reverend Rebecca says yes, and the Reverend Lowe baptized, and generally the owners in that time, slaves, whatever church that they went to, their slaves would go to also. And baptisms, obviously, that some of these blacks were adults, and so they would baptize their adult servant along with their children. So yes, they definitely were part of the church. Again, St. Paul's records, there's a lot involved in St. Paul's, the church records.
Thank you.
Okay.
And my other question is, I'm glad to hear that there's a lot of records of some positive history, permission to own businesses, some probably very well-educated, affluent people documenting pleasant anecdotes about experiences, but I imagine that the reality was probably that racism was horrible, and that the lives probably weren't very easy or good. But I don't know if that's true, and I'm trying to parse the difference between, the kind of the good feeling things that we're seeing in the records and really what the reality may have been for them.
Yeah.
You haven't come across any sense of that?
No, no, that's difficult. Yeah, could you pass, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I found it very interesting, all of the transitions going on from slaves, servants, to hopefully free people.
Free.
And the fact that that was going on at the same time that ship's captains were engaging in this trade. And I just wanted to, if you haven't already looked into Spencer Pierce Little House, the non-public part of the Spencer Pierce Little House on like the third or fourth floor, I can't remember. I remember getting a private tour there one time, and there are scratchings on the ceiling of all of the names of people. Now, I don't recall, I don't think Ned can recall whether that was part of the railroad, or whether it was a holding place for the people who were on their way to the islands or from the islands. Do you know?
Yeah.
It's probably a treasure trove of information with different names that you might find in some.
Sure, Bethany, I'm sure, Bethany was the manager of the Spencer Pierce Little Farm, so she has all that background information, and currently Madison. I'm not familiar with that.
Lee, I wanted to just clarify, the Wolf Tavern.
Yes.
The Wolf Tavern was right next to the library, correct?
Correct. Where the parking lot is now, that was the third location of the Wolf Tavern.
And could you give us a little history of the Wolf Tavern?
Oh, okay. Wolf Tavern was established in the mid-1700s by William Davenport, and it was his house, basically, that he took a room and made it a tavern. And it was on, I've just lost it. Threadneedle Alley on State Street that cuts into In Street. And that's where the original Wolf Tavern was. Burned down 1811, Great Fire, then it went up on the corner of Temple. And then it moved to its final location. It was absolutely beautiful, where the city parking lot is on the corner of Harris and State Street. Absolutely beautiful. And the owner in the 50s, there were people from all over coming and staying at the Wolf Tavern. The archives has lots of records of the Wolf Tavern. Actually see handwritten names of folks who visited and stayed there. And the owner also owned the Brown Hotel, the Garrison Inn. And there was a kind of a battle over liquor licenses, and he decided he didn't want the Wolf Tavern any longer. It was an absolutely beautiful building. Now, at the same time, there's a parking lot now, and what does everybody complain about? Well, we need more parking. So, but that's a beautiful, beautiful part of Newburyport history.
When was it torn down?
In the 50s. Not exactly 50, I don't recall. I wrote about it, I don't remember. It's somewhere in the 50s, yeah, early 50s.
Yeah, we have an online question. So Teddy Speck, member here, asks, says, thank you, Ghlee, thank you. And are there things that we can do to aid in your research?
Oh.
That's the question.
Keep being cheerleaders. Right. Go on tours and presentations. Yeah. Let's see, Teddy. What else? Yeah, I want to see you in a tour at Oak Hill. Old Hill Burying Ground and Highland Cemetery, Teddy. There'll be tours, more tours this spring and summer. Anybody else got any ideas? I'm sorry? Oh, buy my book. Okay. And Reverend?
What about supporting the tour that you were just talking about, waiting on a grant? Do you need additional support?
We might be able to squeak it out with our grant, and I've got some other kind of grant. So, you never know until you get into it and think, oh, it's going to be easy, and then it ends up costing more. But I think we're okay. But we'll put a shout out. It would go through the museum. Bethany could arrange something if there was $5 or $10 donation just to help to get it printed. But what basically is the graphic designer the graphic designer and then printing it. Because the rest of us are just helping out. We're volunteering. So.
Hello, Ghlee. It's
Hi.
Anna Smolowitz.
Yes.
Thank you
Hi.
for the use of the cemetery for theater. Teddy, write a play.
Yeah, there you go. Teddy, write a play.
Teddy was my student when he was short. But, I'm a student of the study of racism, particularly from the Holocaust perspective. And Dr. King said something about, in order for evil to sustain, men and women of goodwill, ordinary people, have to say and do nothing. I'm loosely paraphrasing.
Right.
But that's true. And that would be really, please forgive me for saying this, the way to describe New England, Newburyport, Newbury, Amesbury, places we live. It's a conspiracy of silence. It's everyone knowing that a baby's sold at 1 year old and doing nothing and saying nothing because you can't. Frank Cousins' African-American family here in the 20th century. Father was the last to walk in his high school at Newburyport High. He had to walk at the end of the line, even though his name began with a C. It's stuff like that. People once said to me, you've got to remember you're Jewish in Newburyport, because don't forget it, because nobody else will. What does that mean? What does it all mean? And I know it's not what we're here to talk about today, but I would say it's never what we talk about in public or in lectures. We just don't go there. It's too sensitive, and it's not us, it's our ancestors that are responsible. But we're here now, and we're teaching now, and what are we going to teach our kids about the history of this town, the truth of it? That's all I want to say.
So thank you, Ghlee, for helping with our Black History Initiative signs. You've been very generous with your time. And I'd like to answer the Moses Prophet towns, the question you had about Wolf Tavern. Our very next sign to go up is going to have, in the sign, there will be at least a partial actual photograph reproduced, and of course Sharon has been indispensable of the library archives, and it will feature Moses Prophet Towns and the Wolf Tavern, and it's going to be on the site, State and Harris Street, in that parking lot. So that will be upcoming a little bit later this year. The sign is in production.
We have an online question from Tom Stites. He wants a little bit of clarification on the geography of Guinea Village. The way you describe it, it sounds like it was next to the roundhouse where steam engines would have been serviced. Is that correct? And he points out if that's close enough, then that's a city dirty part of town, and the implications of that.
Well, you just got to visualize Auburn Street, Pond Street, connecting to Lowell Street, and I'm visualizing the roundhouse, and the roundhouse was, it would be west, because the houses were along the road. On the old maps in 1800s, you can see the houses, and they were along that road of Auburn and Low Street. So they didn't get off west by the railroad, and the railroad came in at 1840, so there were houses before 1840. Does that answer?
We're going to need to.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do one more, and then I do want to honor that we said this would run until 12, so just, it's not up to me to pick, Stephen. You pick.
Hi, you talked about enslaved people in Newburyport, and what I was wondering is, do we know the proportion of enslaved to free people in town, and how late were enslaved people living in Newburyport?
Yeah. That real technical, yeah, I can't talk off the top of my head. You're talking about enslaved blacks and then free blacks. Yeah, don't have those numbers. Sharon, you got anything? Yeah, we don't have those numbers. We could eventually determine that, but again, that takes a long, long time of research.
Go ahead. Sorry, Justin.
I was going to say, it is true that I believe it was 1784 or 1786, slavery was made illegal in Massachusetts.
Yes.
So that's the last, after that point, legally, those designations would have changed and could have, so it's a question about are things changing before then, but certainly after that point.
So actually, Linda Lou will be the last question, and then I'll say a few closing words.
Thank you, Ghlee. Picking up on what Anna had said, is the Newburyport school system picking up on all this valuable information that you have gleaned, and is it being taught to the young people in our community?
We certainly make it all available, and we have student groups coming in to the library archives doing lots of research. And so this brochure, certainly the Black Heritage Trail, will be made available to all. We'll send it online and then hard copies too. So we're always available, the archives and the museum, to answer any questions and provide any information for them. Those teachers are really tight on curriculum. Sometimes they don't have a choice. Lots of them do want to include local history, but it's just a time factor and what they're having to do in their curriculum.
So I just want to close by before I thank Ghlee one final time, well, not final, but for the moment, to say that certainly I think we are the ones who get to decide how and these conversations continue. I'm looking, at Anna and Teddy's question, and I know there's a large group of folks here at FRS that are deeply committed to this work, and they welcome community members and partners. This is not something we're doing as an exclusive church community. This is about our commitment to this and to Newburyport and the surrounding towns, and that we are the ones who answer that question. We bear that burden and responsibility, I believe, to say, how do we do this together? I do hope you'll come again on the 29th, where we hear about a particular individual who was a minister here for a brief time until asked to leave for his strong commitment to anti-racism and ending slavery. And again, would you just join me in thanking Ghlee for all that she's done and for being with us today, please? Thank you, everyone, so much, and we'll see you again soon.